Welcome to the Purchasing Division's Vendor Resource Module for Basic Purchasing. The Purchasing Division developed this online Vendor Resource Module series to assist any vendor who wishes to conduct business with the state of West Virginia to learn the state procurement process, as well as to highlight the vendor's responsibilities in this process. Should you have questions following this presentation, you may find additional information on the Purchasing Division's Vendor Resource Center. The link to this site will be provided at the end of this presentation. Let's get started. In this presentation, I will describe the purpose of the state purchasing process and the West Virginia Purchasing Division. I will provide an overview of the purchasing levels of authority, and finally, I will outline the purchasing decision path that state agencies are required to follow when completing a transaction. The West Virginia state purchasing process was designed to ensure that all vendors have an equal opportunity to bid on commodities and services sought by state agencies. Solicitations are prepared in a way that ensure fairness and transparency among the vendor community, state agencies, and the state's tax-paying citizens. The state also seeks to promote competition among vendors and ultimately get the lowest price for the best quality possible, or in some cases, the best value. The West Virginia Purchasing Division was developed to oversee the timely, responsive, and efficient procurements of these commodities and services. The mission of the Purchasing Division is simple, yet direct in what it hopes to accomplish, and that is to provide prudent and fair spending practices in procuring quality goods and services at the lowest cost to state taxpayers by maximizing efficiencies and offering guidance to its customers. Each year, the state of West Virginia purchases hundreds of millions of dollars in commodities and services from thousands of vendors to efficiently operate its state agencies and their respective programs. Purchasing laws, regulations, and procedures have been implemented to protect the interests of all parties, including taxpayers, state agencies, and businesses participating in the procurement process. But it is the responsibility of the West Virginia Purchasing Division to ensure that taxpayers' dollars are being spent in an ethical and cost-efficient manner according to the statutory and regulatory requirements. The Purchasing Division is bound by West Virginia Code 5A3, the Code of State Rules Title 148, Series 1, and detailed guidelines as outlined in the Purchasing Division Procedures Handbook. Information in this online Vendor Resource Module series is supplemental to these statutory and regulatory requirements as it pertains to business partners of the state of West Virginia. To increase efficiency in the state purchasing process, the Purchasing Director has delegated purchasing authority to agencies for those procurements expected to cost $25,000 or less, in accordance with state law and rule. These procurements are processed at the agency level. We'll go into more detail on the bid levels for agency-delegated purchases on the next slide. The second level of authority includes all procurements that are expected to exceed $25,000, otherwise known as formal acquisitions. Acquisitions at this level of authority are processed by the Purchasing Division. As noted previously, the Purchasing Division has delegated purchasing authority to state agencies for procurements estimated to cost $25,000 or less. No agency shall issue a series of requisitions to circumvent this $25,000 threshold, which is referred to as stringing. Amounts spent with vendors are viewed comprehensively. This means that state agencies continuously monitor their expenditures with vendors to ensure that the total amount spent with a given vendor within any 12-month period does not exceed a bid threshold without the proper level of documentation and bidding. Commodities and services that are expected to cost $2,500 or less require no bids. However, competition is always encouraged. For purchases of $2,500.01 to $5,000, 3 verbal bids are required where possible, and the lowest bid meeting specifications must be awarded the purchase order or contract. Purchases of $5,000.01 to $25,000 require 3 written bids where possible, and the lowest bid meeting specifications must be awarded the purchase order or contract. Signed fax or electronic bids are acceptable at the agency delegated level. A vendor choosing to submit a bid or a written change to a submitted bid by electronic transmission accepts full responsibility for transmission and receipt of the bid or written change to the submitted bid. The state accepts no responsibility for the unsuccessful and/or incomplete transmission of bids by electronic transmission. Unlike agency-delegated purchases, Acquisitions estimated to exceed $25,000 are required to be processed through the Purchasing Division for all agencies under its authority, unless statutorily exempt. For a list of exemptions, visit Appendix E of the Purchasing Division's Vendor Procurement Guide, or visit the Purchasing Exemptions link located on the screen in front of you. The Purchasing Division has the authority to develop, amend, or repeal guidelines set forth to comply with the established code. The Purchasing Director may make specific exemptions to these guidelines if particular purchases are determined to be in the best interest of the state of West Virginia. In addition, the Purchasing Division has a responsibility for the standardization of commodities and services purchased and may adopt standard specifications to apply in all purchases of a particular commodity or service. These standard specifications result in statewide contracts, which are awarded and maintained by the Purchasing Division. These statewide contracts are mandatory for use by state agencies and include frequently purchased items, such as office supplies, vehicles, food, and more. For a list of mandatory contracts, see Appendix F of the Vendor Procurement Guide or visit the contracts link located on the screen in front of you. The Purchasing Division assigns its buying staff to statewide contracts as well as to specific state agencies, which enables the respective agencies to communicate and process their transactions through one centralized buyer. For a list of buyer assignments for state agencies, see Appendix C of the Vendor Procurement Guide or visit the link for the buyer assignments list located on the screen in front of you. To educate vendors in the steps required by agency purchasers in making a purchase, the next couple of slides will outline the purchasing decision path. The first step requires the agency to determine its need and what commodity or service is required by the organization to meet that need. This determination includes such aspects as quality level, delivery requirements, estimated costs, and other basic information about the commodity or service being sought. Once the need is established, the agency must determine if the commodity or service is available from internal resources, including correctional industries, the State Use Program, or the West Virginia State Agency for Surplus Property. If available through correctional industries or the State Use Program, also known as sheltered workshops, the commodity or service must be acquired through this manner. If the commodity or service is not available from internal resources, the agency must determine if that commodity or service is available from a statewide or agency contract. If available, the agency must purchase the commodity or service in accordance with purchasing guidelines as indicated within the statewide or agency contract. If the commodity or service is not available through an existing statewide or agency contract, the agency must determine if the purchase will be competitive, sole source, or an emergency. Sole source means that only one vendor can provide the commodity or service. In order to make that determination, state agencies must conduct market research to look for competitive sources for the commodity or service being sought. All market research must be documented and maintained within the agency file. An emergency purchase is necessary when there is a threat to any person or property. In cases of an emergency, the West Virginia Code and the Code of State Rules both require that a minimum of 3 bids be obtained where possible. Depending upon the severity of the emergency, if an agency makes a determination that time does not allow the agency to obtain bids from vendors for the emergency situation, the commodity or service may be immediately attained. However, the file must be fully documented with an explanation as to why time was of the essence and why emergency bids could not be solicited. If time does permit, the agency may place a restriction on vendors to respond in a specified time, such as within a 24-hour period or whatever time frame is deemed appropriate based on the nature of the emergency. If a commodity or service is considered to be competitive and is not available through internal resources or any statewide or agency contracts, the agency must utilize its delegated purchasing procedures if the acquisition is estimated to cost $25,000 or less. If the commodity or service does not meet the definition of sole source or an emergency and is not available through internal resources or on an existing statewide or agency contract, it is considered a formal acquisition if it is expected to exceed $25,000. The preferred method of procurement is a request for quotation process, with the lowest responsible bidder meeting specifications being awarded the contract. However, If the purchase is a service estimated to exceed $250,000 and the scope of the work is not well defined, the agency may elect to use the request for proposal process where cost is not the sole determining factor in the award. Next, all bids or proposals, depending upon the bid process used, are opened, evaluated, and an award is made in accordance with purchasing guidelines. More on the evaluation and award process can be found in the General Purchasing Information Vendor Resource module. Step 8, Encumbrance of Purchase Orders, ensures that the agency has the appropriate funds to make the specific purchase. Except in an emergency, the encumbrance date is the earliest date that a vendor may commence work on any contract. Step 9 in the purchasing decision path provides participating vendors with the right to protest specifications and purchase order awards as outlined in Title 148, Series 1 of the Code of State Rules. More on the protest process can be found in the Vendor Remedies Online Vendor Resource module. Step 10 requires state agencies to establish benchmarks for agency contracts to ensure that the product acquired or services to be rendered are offered in accordance with the contract specifications. This requirement, known as contract management, is specifically a requirement for contracts in excess of $1 million, with construction contracts exempt. There are provisions that agencies are required to meet in regard to post-award meetings with the vendor in order to review the requirements and deliverables necessary in completion of that contract. There are also specific reporting requirements that the agency is required to follow, which are submitted to the Purchasing Division. In the final step of the purchasing decision path, the Purchasing Division conducts regular inspections of purchasing files to determine whether all of the required procedures have been followed and ensure contract compliance.